It was a warm June morning in 1842 when Mendelssohn was invited for the second time to perform at Buckingham Palace for Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. For Victoria and Albert, it was their shared love of music that brought them together. They took their sheet music with them wherever they travelled so they could play piano duets and sing for each other. Mendelssohn, knowing this, had a request. Would the Queen like to sing? He rummaged through his sheet music and produced a set of songs for her to pick her favourite. She chose Italian. It wasn't until she finished singing that he confessed. It was written by his sister, Fanny Mendelssohn. Fanny was the oldest of 4 children, including her younger brother, Felix Mendelssohn. They grew up in Berlin and initially learned piano from her mother. After studying briefly in Paris, Fanny and her brother received lessons from some of Berlin's top tutors, including composer Karl Zelter. Zelter had high praise for her, even favouring her over Felix. In 1816, he wrote in a letter, "Abraham Mendelssohn has adorable children, and his oldest daughter could give you something of Sebastian Bach. This child is really something special." At 14 years old, Fanny could already play from memory all 24 preludes of Bach's The Well-Tempered Clavier and had started composing her own works. Yet, it was Felix performing his first public showcase. Felix soon began touring Europe, dazzling audiences with his composing and piano, and by his mid-20s, he was already on the way to being recognized as one of the Romantic Age's greatest composers. Much later, in 1831, Zettler portrays Fanny with the highest praise he could have for a woman at the time. She plays like a man. But that was precisely the problem. She wasn't a man. In the Victorian era, men and women's roles became more sharply defined than any other era in history. Although it had been a custom for men to make the decisions in the household, up until now, women had helped their brothers and fathers in the family business. In the 19th century, men increasingly commuted to work, and women stayed at home to oversee the domestic duties. The Mendelssohn father upheld these social norms, and although he also saw Fanny as the more musical child, he tolerated but did not support Fanny's work as a musician. In 1820, he wrote to her, "Music will perhaps become his, Felix's, profession. While for you it can and must only be an ornament, it may never form the core of your life." Well, how did Felix feel about this? Well, although he was said to support her work and composition, he was definitely cautious about her publishing work under her own name. In a letter to his mother, he said, "From my knowledge of Fanny, I should say that she has neither inclination nor vocation for authorship. She is too much all that a woman ought to be for this. Publishing would only disturb her in these, and I cannot say that I approve of it." Forced by circumstance, by her dutiful attitude to her father and her intense relationship to her brother, Fanny dedicated herself to concerts that were set up by her mother in the family home. Of course, when they first started, Felix took the lead, but when he went on tour, Fanny took over. She seized the opportunity to develop her musical skills and even put together a choir so she could perform large-scale works. The entire cultural elite of Berlin visited, including artists and musicians like Wolfgang Goethe, Heinrich Heine, Niccolo Paganini, Franz Liszt, Clara Schumann, and Robert Schumann being regular guests. In 1829, Fanny Mendelssohn got married, yay, to Wilhelm Hensel. Wilhelm Hensel was an artist and was much more liberal than her brother and father. He did not demand his wife stop composing, but unequivocally supported her musical ambitions and encouraged her to publish her musical works under her own name. He even left manuscript paper for her on the piano each morning before he left to paint. However, even after her marriage, she couldn't bring herself to go against the publication ban by her father and brother. It wasn't until her father died in 1835 that Fanny made her first contact with publishers. Felix was not supportive. As a married woman, she wasn't required to heed her brother's wishes. However, she couldn't bring herself to go against him, so continued to showcase her talents in the family home only. In the meantime, Felix allowed Fanny to publish some of her works under his name. It was in this time that she wrote to her good friend Goethe, who was supportive of her work. She's quoted as saying, "It must be a sign of talent that I do not give up, though I can get nobody to take an interest in my efforts." It took another 11 years for her to defy her brother's wishes. After being approached by 2 Berlin publishers, she finally published some of her works under her married name. Felix finally gave his reluctant blessing, writing to her, "I send you my professional blessing on becoming a member of the craft. May you have much happiness in giving pleasure to others. May you taste only the sweets and none of the bitterness of authorship. May the public pelt you with roses and never with sand." A warm endorsement. Later that year, she composed and published her garden songs for choir. She was happy with her work. However, I'm going to give you a little quote from a letter that she wrote, which really shows her state of mind. She was definitely a woman that still believed in society's norms and couldn't bring herself to admit the dedication that she'd given to her music. There is a very pleasant time associated with these songs. That's why they are more dear to me than my other trifles. Finally, at 41, she managed to break free of the restraints of Victorian society upheld by her father and brother. And in May 1847, her garden songs had a rave review from a prestigious music magazine. Could this have been the start of her forging her own career? We will never know. That same day, she succumbed to a stroke while rehearsing some of Felix's choral work. Felix was in London when he heard the news and couldn't get back in time for the funeral. Devastated, he couldn't work. And he had a change of heart. Instead, he dedicated his time to collecting all 460 of Fanny Mendelssohn's work to give to his publisher to publish. He wanted to ensure that she got the recognition that had been withheld from her entire life. However, in November that year, he also suffered a stroke and died. He managed to get some of the work to his publishers, and they heeded his wishes and started to distribute the music, but not all of it. Despite Felix's effort, Fanny was represented as a feminizing influence that sapped his artistry in biographies of his life in the 19th century. It wasn't until the 1980s that people started recognizing her work. Are there any artists that you guys know that didn't get the recognition they deserved because of society or the circumstances they were in? I would be really interested to read about them and learn a little more, so please do post some down in the comments. Fanny was an incredibly talented woman, and I would really recommend checking out some of her work, especially Notturno in G minor. It's absolutely beautiful, and my favourite, Allegro Molto in C minor, which is playing under this right now. These are some of the most beautiful pieces that I have ever heard. I love telling the story of Fanny Mendelssohn. Not just because it's an interesting story from long ago, or even because telling it helps right or wrong, but because it helps me to remember to keep evaluating my point of view. What we once thought was common sense through a modern lens seems unacceptable to us now. And Felix and Abraham Mendelssohn weren't bad people, they were just products of their time. Many of us know parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles who have old-fashioned views, and we understand how these views have affected the world. Fanny's story reminds me to challenge my own opinions, to keep on rooting out the biases that have inevitably built within myself, and to forgive myself when I find them. Because, like Felix and Abraham, we are all just products of our time. But luckily, times change, and I plan to change with them. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please do like and subscribe. I really enjoyed researching this one. And if you would like a little bit extra content, please do head over to my Patreon, which is patreon.com/BethRoars. I have to give them all a big thanks over at Patreon. If it wasn't for them, this channel would not exist. So thank you very much once again, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! Da